This whole exercise of counting how many tigers you have is like a audit in a company. You should know whether the effort that you have invested in saving tigers or any other wildlife, is it giving us results or not? And the only way to determine whether you're on the right track or that your efforts are resulting in something positive on the ground is by counting the numbers. There are a few things with respect to numbers. Are numbers really the thing? And can we, just like a blood test report, is this it? Or is there something else? Surely we need to go beyond numbers. Numbers give us some indication of whether we are doing well or not. But then there are systemic issues that need to be addressed. For instance, right now we are only seeing tiger numbers. We are not seeing prey densities. The prey, how much of prey there is not, that data is not with us. And I think Karnataka has done a reasonable job in terms of putting out these numbers. Now, for your readers, it might be of interest to know what is this camera trapping and how does it give us these numbers, and what was the method in the past, which was this pugmark method of estimation. To give an analogy, the pugmark method of counting was it was a total count methodology, whereas camera trapping is based on sampling. Just like you would sample for an election. You won't go to every voter, obviously. You will only select a good sample, and if your sample is very good, rural, urban, poor, rich, whatever, then your data that you will get in terms of predictions will be pretty accurate. Similarly here, we need not know exactly whether there are 426 tigers or whatever it is. We need to know the range. And camera trapping is one method. It is expensive, but one method where you can estimate densities of tigers fairly accurately, provided your sampling design is correct, because where to deploy camera traps, what should be the period of closure, normally about 45 days it is done, and how much of sampling effort is required. If you see the 2006 onwards, sampling effort has gone up considerably to 22. The second point is that how often do you have to do this? Today, earlier it was being done every 4 years. Now 2020, no, it's not been done annually as yet. 20, there was some number, and then 22. It is very important to do it annually for the simple reason that there is a lot of turnover of population. The cubs, when they reach about 18 to 24 months, they separate out from the mother. The mother, in fact, pushes them away. And then at that time, they are called as transients. So these transients go out and try to establish their own territory. Tigers are territorial animals. And the higher the prey density, the smaller the home range. So in places like Nagarhole, it's as small as 10 square kilometers. Whereas in the Russian Far East, it's about 200 square kilometers. So in a much smaller area, you can pack more number of tigers. So when these transients go out, they try to fight with other resident tigers, and there is conflict. So they may get injured, they may die, they may get pushed out. So there is a turnover of population. So therefore, annually looking at tiger numbers would be important. And the last point I want to say is, who should be doing this? Always, even if you take a factory, there is a production team. They have a target to produce X number of mobile phones. they will be working only to that goal. But the quality control's job is very different. They will say that if this phone is not of certain quality and there are defects, stop that batch. So they will eternally be in conflict. The QC people and the production people will be in conflict. Even in a company, there's an internal accounts department, finance department, but they don't do your audits. It's done by somebody else. So I would want the system to recognize that there must be outside specialists, trained people who should do these things and give an independent, of course the department will be involved. I'm not saying department is not involved. So it should be as independent as possible. Wildlife Institute of India is not an independent agency. It's a government funded agency of the Ministry of Environment. So we must have, at least in our high priority areas, we must have independent researchers doing this, evaluating. And see, science is all about trying to question. And the more you question, science advances. But that is not happening. So two things. One is it should be annual, and there should be independent research also in some of our high priority areas. And these research agencies are willing to put their own money and do it. It is not that the government has to spend twice. That would not be correct. And see, the frontline managers and staff, they have their own duties. They are really hard pressed for time. There is staff shortage, etc., etc. And how can you expect one forest guard to be an expert in law enforcement and scientific method of counting tigers and doing social justice for tribal people and so forth? I mean, it's not possible. So therefore, I would be very happy if the government agrees and encourages independent research so that we have both the sets of data. And this entire data set must come out. See, after all, it's being done with public money. So there is a duty cast upon the government to release the raw data so that it can be analyzed. Even if independent researchers are not going out and collecting primary data, if the raw data is put out in the public domain, then there are good statisticians. Karnataka has many very good people who are, in fact, Ulas Karan pioneered camera trapping in India, and he faced a lot of opposition when the bureaucracy said, no, we are very good with pug marks. All this is, but Mr. P.K. Sen, unfortunately, is not with us today. He passed away. He was the director of Project Tiger in 2004. He said no. Yes, we need independent research and we need to move on from this pug mark thing. Because he was a field-oriented person. So that set the stage, and therefore, Karnataka has a lot of experts who will be happy to assist. And nothing wrong in getting an independent assessment. And as far as Maharashtra and Madhya Pradesh and Karnataka, the question you asked, I don't know, because WII has not released the methodology. But all I can tell you is that WII is following a methodology called as index calibration. I'm not an expert on it, but as a conservationist, I understand something, that they're using the data that they collect and using this index calibration method to extrapolate and arrive at a number. Whereas Karnataka now has increased the sampling effort. So you are actually capturing the tigers and you are sampling a much larger area where the extrapolation is not required or is minimized to a large extent. Therefore, I initially said that this is a reasonable data, but it would be great if they put out the raw data and it is analyzed, or there is in science always advances by a system called as peer review. Analysis is very important. Without a proper analytical framework, your numbers can go wrong. So we need to, the people who are trained in this, and there are biostatisticians who know this, and that's how they critique this index calibration methodology, which was adopted by WII. And actually this whole, for people who are interested, this is based on an old principle developed by a French mathematician called Laplace. It is called as mark recapture. So they did it with rodents first. They captured some rodents, marked it, released it, and again captured, and found how many marked rodents have been captured again. Tigers are identified by stripe pattern, and both sides, both flanks have different stripe patterns. And even in law enforcement, that's how we find out, even by looking at a photograph of that skin is a fake, because they would have painted it evenly, the stripes. That's not the case with tigers. They're uniquely, the stripes are unique for each side. So you need to have two cameras at a staggered like this, and the tiger passes, or rather the tiger passes like this, and both flanks are taken. The photograph is taken, yeah. So what happens is that then you will know that this is tiger 101 or whatever that is. And then you will look at all the other photographs and arrive at a, that's why they have given a data which shows how many unique tigers have been captured. So that's how it is done. So this is based on this principle called as mark recapture. So numbers are important, but numbers are not the end all. And we need to have annual monitoring, and there must be an independent research effort. Raw data must be put out, and whoever is interested can pick it up, critique it. That peer review process is very important for advancement of science. Not that you're trying to cast aspersions or you're trying, but it's always good to have people look at it. There's no harm. And that will serve us better. Now, if you hear time frames come into the picture, if you are saying that in Nagarhole we have 140 plus tigers, and therefore the management in the last 5 years has been excellent, that would be an incorrect theory. Tigers, recovery of tigers has taken a lot of effort. And so the initial efforts started in the mid-70s, early 70s, after the Wildlife Act came in. And that will lead us to another thing of whether people and tigers can coexist, which is the general perception. So the effort started, and it took a very long time to consolidate these areas, notify them as national parks and sanctuaries, move people out, though it wasn't done very well initially, and create habitat conducive for tiger populations, and stop or clamp down on hunting and all kinds of extractive things that happen inside the forest, whether it's timber, whether it is forest produce, etc. So these efforts took a long time. Forest fires, addressing forest fires. These took a long time, and the first results started appearing after about 2 decades. And based on that effort of the then officers, staff who toiled, we reached a certain stage from where further efforts were made, and today we have reached a certain stage. Now, whether we should now say that, okay, we have achieved it, let's sit back and relax. That can't happen. We also have to address the issue whether these numbers can be sustained. Because parks can't increase, size of parks can't increase. So, and we know from scientific data that if the prey densities are very good, home range size of a female tigress, the breeding female, is at the center of the social structure of tigers. So it's as small as 10 kilometers, 10 square kilometers in a place like Nagarhole. So we have this data. So the real issue today is we should go beyond numbers. And what should you go on to? You should go on to consolidation of tiger habitats. These results have given us an idea of where your best densities are and where there is presence of tigers, but lot more can be done, and there are good opportunities. So if you take from north of Karnataka in Kali to Nagarhole, you have Kudremukh in between, you have to the Bandipur, Nagarhole and other areas, and you have even Hills further up. There is a great opportunity for us to consolidate. More than opportunity, there is an urgent requirement to consolidate. Now there are three ingredients. So this thing, let me clarify. Can human beings and tigers coexist? My clear answer is no, for a variety of reasons. And if you historically analyze this aspect, it is very clear that tiger has lost more than 90% of its former range to human activity. I am not getting into rich, poor, urban, rural. It's not a binary. I am saying any kind of human activity, including urban rich like us, it affects the tiger. So therefore, where are the opportunities today? Because India has reserved about 4.5% of its landscape for these endangered species, including the tiger. So the question that arises is, if India has not been able to reconcile its development aspirations and deliver social justice to people using 96% of its landscape, will it make any dent on the problem, on those problems, if we intrude into this last 4%? The answer is very clear. We need to smartly deal with economic development and social justice using 96% of the landscape, and the last remaining 4 or 5% of India, where these animals, like the numbers that have come out show, have a reasonable chance of survival. And it is also our moral duty to ensure, because all of nature, this generation can only hold in trust and hand it over to the future. So there is a moral duty cast upon this generation to also do that. And therefore, in these 4%, we need to have habitats that are free of human pressures to the best extent possible. People are marooned inside, and most people have seen the world outside. They are straddling two different worlds, so to say. We are not like Amazon, where you have 500 or 5,000 square miles of forests and you have 50 people who are collecting something in the forest for their own use, bona fide use. Even in places like Nagarhole, luckily Bandipur doesn't have people. There are 6,000 people in 600 odd square kilometers. So that is 10 persons per square kilometer. So you can't crash land an Amazonian model of harmonious coexistence in a place like Nagarhole. You need to deal with it in a site-specific manner and reach out to people and try to resolve that. And the only way to resolve it, a win-win solution, is, and I'm not talking theory here, it is happening on the ground, but it has got derailed in Nagarhole, is voluntary resettlement. There is a very good package. See, there are three ingredients, key ingredients required to resolve this. One, willingness of people to move. Second, offering them a good incentive-driven package. Three, land and other facilities outside. Because the socio-economic facilities that you and I enjoy, why should they be denied? Why should the tribal child not use a laptop? So, because genetically they are no different from us. So, that child can also prosper, acquire education. So, these three, all three ingredients are in place. There is money, and for your, I would like to share that there is a misconception that forest department or forestry sector is short of funds. That's not the case, because there is a big fund called as CAMPA, Compensatory Afforestation Fund. 48,000 crores was released in 2018-19 by the central government. This included levies imposed by the Supreme Court called as net present value. So this was distributed to states, and Karnataka received 1,300 crores. Unfortunately, and out of that, for this voluntary resettlement, they can easily pull out about 300 crores. And in Kali, Kudremukh, Nagarhole, Hills, etc., there are about 1,500 families. Many are willing to come out. In fact, Kali, it is happening. There's a very dynamic deputy conservator of forest who's doing it. But Nagarhole, it has fallen. Hills, it's not happening. Kudremukh, it's not happening. At snail's pace. This should be taken up as a special purpose vehicle. There are trained officers who are very adept at it. Mr. Yatish Kumar, who was DCF of Bhadra, and Mr. Gopal Krishna Gowda, who was Deputy Commissioner. Of course, Mr. Gopal Krishna Gowda is retired. Yatish is still in service. So you should constitute a special team, because funding is available. Give them all the powers that are required and develop the special purpose vehicle and do this and finish it once and for all. It is a win-win solution for both people and wildlife. And that will ensure that these numbers can be sustained. Otherwise, if you don't resolve this issue, it is going to collapse in the next 10 years. Like I said, for recovery, it takes a long time. Damage takes very less time. If you need 30 years to recover, in 10 years you can finish cause damage. So my appeal to the government is this: we have tried tremendously, because we were involved in the first resettlement in Nagarhole. It happened in 1998. 51 families came out. We are in 2023. It is not over yet. So I think, yes, we can be happy with the numbers, but these numbers cannot be sustained if we don't have habitats free of human pressures, and there is a reasonable chance for us to consolidate these habitats. The three ingredients required: money, willingness of people, and land. All three are available. And there are some officers who are good at this. So this has to happen. And for this, we need quality leadership at the highest level. And the Forest Minister of Karnataka seems to be enthusiastic about doing something. I only hope that he gives the necessary political impetus to the department to ensure that this happens. Then we can talk of sustaining these numbers. Of course, there will be the threat of hunting and all that, that is continuous. Protection, eternal vigilance is required. That will happen. But if you don't resolve these conflicts, and we are not even talking of conflict outside where an elephant comes out or where a tiger kills somebody outside. We need to have these spaces to secure that. So that is a difficult issue. I can say that with my experience that it cannot be totally stopped. It can be managed to a large extent through a variety of things. First and foremost, you need to see the consolidation of these habitats by removing the inholdings itself will ensure that some amount of conflict is minimized. Second, we need to identify scientifically key parcels of land that can be acquired so that we can have some connectivity between larger habitats so that animals can move. Corridors. So wherever feasible, I'm not saying it can happen everywhere. In some places there is no other option but to have good barriers. Where there is beyond that, there is no connectivity and it's all a sea of humanity. There you need to put some barriers to prevent animals because people also have to survive. The other thing is there must be a serious curb on this land grant. Revenue department, it's like the government's right hand not knowing what the left hand is doing. The revenue department has granted crucial parcels of wooded areas over the last 3-4 decades. And much of the conflict that's happening is elephants are today in that area. They were in that area earlier, but today it is a thriving agricultural land. Now you're saying there is conflict. So we need to address that. The other issue is with respect to management of habitat. Unfortunately, and I have to say this and I'll say it without mincing words, bulldozers are running amok in our national parks. Civil works, unnecessary civil works are going on because, for instance, Nagarhole and Bandipur can be managed, and any senior officer can tell you that it can be managed with all its staff, protection infrastructure, etc., excluding resettlement, in about 10 crore rupees. If it gets 50 crore rupees, what happens to the remaining 40 crores? That is driving a slew of these civil works and earth-moving works. Let us not forget that you have to manage these national parks not just for tigers or elephants. There are also amphibians, reptiles, etc. in the schedules of the Wildlife Protection Act. If you're saying that vehicles should only go on the jeep track and not outside because it can affect wildlife, you're taking these bulldozers and excavators right into habitat and gouging out earth. So what happens to a burrow where there is a reptile? Or what happens? This has to stop. This is causing an endless creation of waterholes. See, we are not ready for culling as a society. So in places where animal populations have really improved and have reached almost densities beyond which it can't sustain, there must be a natural process where these populations have to be controlled. And one of the things, for instance, elephants. Elephants don't add to the population like tigers. So there's a long gestation period, etc., and intercalving period and so forth. So what happens is when a calf gets recruited into the population, you are adding to the population. But creating waterholes reduces calf mortality. We must have some calf mortality. as in a natural setting, which used to happen earlier. See, elephants have evolved over millions of years. The forestry department is a 150-year-old entity. There have been droughts, there have been floods, etc., but these animals have survived. So and we should not manage these areas like manicured parks, in my view, because these must be totally wilderness areas where our involvement must be minimum to the extent that we ensure protection and to the extent that these animals do not cause conflict to a large extent. This is all that is required. There are perennial water sources in the area and these animals will find them. For instance, on the eastern edge of Bandipur, there are about more than 100 villages. If you start creating endless number of water holes on the eastern edge, what happens is, it's a simple thing. Elephants need food and water. And the habitat there, unfortunately, the Forest Development Corporation in some areas of Omkara range had planted eucalyptus. Elephant can't eat eucalyptus. You have created, somebody else came in and created a check dam. So there is a water body. So what happens is luscious crops on the other side. There is water here. Elephants will remain. Whatever barrier you put, it will break. I think 2 days ago there was some video or something of an elephant breaking down even the railway track.
We get almost every day reports from Hassan.
Yeah, Hassan is a different ball game. So in these places, what happens is we need to ensure that we scientifically manage the habitat, and this civil works must stop. It is not at all required. I can understand using an excavator for a trench, elephant-proof trench. No problem with that. But not in the heart of our area. Why should we pour concrete and do earth moving inside our best areas? They know it. No, they know it. Many experienced people know it. Some people have also put down their thoughts. But unfortunately, it's like a steroid. You've gotten addicted to it. So they will say at field level, they'll say, oh, why should I go to that range? There is no works. So the leadership of the department must, we have even approached the High Court, and High Court has heard us and appointed a committee and all that. So this is doing no good, and apart from, I said, consolidation of habitat, the second issue is stopping civil works inside these areas and leaving nature as it is. Of course, you have to prevent forest fires. You have to cut fire lines. We are not objecting to all those things. We are objecting to unnecessary civil works, unnecessary creation of water holes, which are not at all required, and there should be a serious clampdown on this. So these two, along with good protection, continued protection, will ensure that we can sustain these numbers. Very important role, because the people are generally suspicious that, and naturally so, because they think that the government will shortchange them and they'll be left high and dry. So you need to sit with them, talk to them, understand what their requirement is, and they will have their own unique requirements. For instance, they'll say, no, we won't leave this taluk. If you get us land only in this taluk, we are comfortable, we won't go across. So a lot of these motivation efforts are required, which activists do. For instance, in Nagarhole, there is an organization called Living Inspiration for Tribals who are doing this. They reach out, their own people will go, sit with them, talk to them, take them to where resettlement has happened. They will interact with people who have already resettled, and then they will come up with their application and say that, so pre-resettlement, there is a role for activists. During resettlement, there is a role for activists. They act as a bridge between the people and the government. And post-resettlement, hand-holding. Do you know, you'll be shocked, what is the budget of Government of India for, there are 10 crore tribal people in the country. You know what is the budget? You can take a guess, but your guess will be wrong. It is 1,30,000 crores per annum. And it is spent by 29 ministries, or rather 29 schemes of various ministries. Now, where is this 1,30,000 crores going? And why should these people suffer, keep suffering? So the role of activist comes in there also. So this team in Nagarhole or the other team in Bhadra, which was doing this hand-holding thing, will ensure and tell these people that, look, you are eligible for the following schemes once you have come out. And it can be very intensively monitored because it's in a designated area. Whether it is Ganga Kalyana Borewell scheme or whatever it is, school or education, so many things. So all these, the government package for resettlement, currently the NTCA package is 15 lakhs. But this big package, if it dovetails, in fact, I was asked by NTCA to evaluate the resettlement in Nagarhole way back in 2010. My report is available in the public domain, I can share it with you. We had said that we should ensure that these schemes are dovetailed to the resettlement area so that people benefit. That will be the ideal situation. So there again, the activists play a watchdog role in ensuring that actually these benefits reach these people. Otherwise, we never know what will go where. So so hand-holding is a very important part, particularly for tribal people. Whereas in Bhadra, it was not tribals, it was farmers. So they were able to manage much better. But these people, and let them get what is due to them. In fact, there was a situation, so my own role, I'll tell you, our group, from 10 lakhs, the package increased to 15 lakhs. We were very happy. We said, acha, good, something good has happened. On a closer reading of the government order, we found in the 10 lakh package, 30% was the cash compensation to the family, which is 3 lakh rupees. In the 15 lakh package, the cash compensation was 15% of 15 lakhs, which is 2.25 lakhs. So 75,000 rupees was less, while the package had gone up to 15 lakhs. So we went and approached Mr. Vijay Bhaskar, who was the additional chief secretary at that time. He later served as chief secretary and retired. We pointed it out to him. And he was concerned about this aspect. And he said, honestly, I can recollect his words, it's still in my ears. He said, I have been cheated. He said, what is this? Why should their package reduce? Of course, he made file notings and all that, and after that, I do not know what is the current position on that. We followed up till he was chief secretary. So this is again an example of how activists can work to ensure that these people get what is due to them. Because you can't leave it just to the government agency. Yes, certainly. Certainly, I can say with some confidence that without prey densities, you can't have these kind of tiger numbers. But it is always important to know those numbers. Just as we are curious and interested to know tiger numbers, we should also know prey numbers. And we can't just assume that they are all okay. And by doing this annually, see, counting prey is very difficult compared to tigers because you need trained volunteers. The system, there are what are called as transects. These are narrow paths cut right through the forest. It will be like you can feel very claustrophobic walking. I have walked many transects for many years. And first, initially, we started out with straight transects of about 3 kilometers. Now the system is a closed square. You start from point A, come back to the same point A, about 3 or 4 kilometers. So you need to gather data on how many direct sightings you have had within a 180-degree radius. You need to record the prey, the species, the number. There is a line bearing and there is a group center, animal group center bearing, and there is a software into which you load this, feed this data in. And it will give you per square kilometer how many deer do you have. Do you have 50 deer per square kilometer? That's a good density. So for this you need extremely good trained volunteers because walking in elephant country is not a joke. So therefore I suspect that there is a serious shortage of trained people to do line transects. And even designing line transects itself is a difficult, it needs a lot of field skills. And unfortunately, I don't want to name anybody, but the organization which pioneered this line transect method is not being given permissions today to do it. And the line, all the lines are there, but they don't want to use those lines for reasons I don't want to go into. But it's unfortunate. So we need to have these numbers. And for instance, when you do this on an annual basis, I again repeat annual, you will get a trend as to what is happening. And just like we do preventive health care, you will know that something is going wrong somewhere. And you can go out and intervene before it's too late. Like in Sariska, we woke up after the last tiger was missing. So we will not get into those kind of situations. That is why doing this annually and counting prey along with tigers is important.
So you were talking of revenue department works and all that. Sir, can you explain the deemed forest scenario? And now the government is saying that deemed forest will be taken back for
Huge batch, I think 9
huge.
lakh hectares.
They want it back.
Anyway, now we are getting into murky waters. But let me try to, it's a complex thing, but I'll try to simplify it to the extent possible. So what are deemed forests? Basically what happened is, on 12/12/1996, the Supreme Court judgment said that because the law did not have, the Indian Forest Act or the Forest Conservation Act does not have a definition of what is forest. So the Supreme Court interpreted it and said all areas which fall within the dictionary meaning of forest, wooded areas, irrespective of whether they are notified or under private ownership, has to be treated as forests. So those are areas that are deemed forests. They are not the reserved forests which are notified under the Indian Forest Act or Karnataka Forest Act. They are not other forests, village forests or private forests notified under local laws. Now, these are thickly wooded areas, virgin forests, even in our Western Ghats. And you don't need to go plant a tree. And the biggest myth today is that maybe the last question that can be addressed. of whether the antidote to forest loss is planting trees. So these are intact areas, and where, due to this judgment of 12/12/96, the Forest Conservation Act became applicable. So if, as a private owner of that particular area, supposing I own 100 acres, out of that I have opened up 50 acres for coffee or cardamom, but the remaining 50 acres is my own land, but it is unopened, and it therefore comes within the meaning of this Supreme Court judgment, definition of forest. If I have to expand my plantation to the remaining 50 acres, I have to seek permission under the Forest Conservation Act. Now you are talking of releasing 6 lakh hectares or whatever of these deemed forests. Now the issue is that if these virgin forested areas are released, it's going to cause a huge amounts of problems. And already the state government, as per the same Supreme Court judgment, appointed an expert committee, and that was called as Expert Committee 1 on forests. They came up with X number of which are what is the total extent of these deemed forests. The government was not convinced, and they had a reconstituted Expert Committee 1. That also came up with a certain number, and that was submitted to the court. It remains there. Then the Central Empowered Committee of the Supreme Court said, it's not enough if you just identify the area. You must identify it survey number wise, village wise, survey number wise. So that was slowly, over a period of time, that was done. And you must get data from the department of what, for each area, what is the total number. In fact, they should produce a booklet and put all the survey numbers like they had done for land bank earlier. So now the FC Act amendment that is happening, and I appeared before the parliamentary committee. Yeah, so you ask the question, then I'll answer. So the short point is that these are extremely good areas where you don't even have to go and do anything. And they've already sequestered a lot of carbon. And even from a climate change perspective, these are very valuable areas. And the government need not spend 1 rupee on doing anything there. Pristine areas. And they need to be protected. And in my view, these should not be granted. And wherever there are old leased lands, which have been leased for 10 rupees an acre or something like that, some 99 years ago. As soon as these leases lapse, the government must take over. There should be no lease extension. This is how you can consolidate the Western Ghats to a fairly large extent, because you cannot replant the Western Ghats. So wherever these areas exist, we need to secure them. And there is no dearth of funding in my view, and in case you need to take over some lands which are very important. You see, the acquisition of lands for a public purpose comes under this principle of eminent domain, where, for instance, tomorrow if opposite my house the road is being widened, I can't question. I can only litigate for better compensation. But if it's for a genuine public purpose, I cannot oppose it. So in some cases, give proper compensation and take over these leased lands so that you consolidate the Western Ghats. This is the way forward. Forest Conservation Act, the amendment. There's a lot of things going on, but essentially what has happened is that it is unfortunate that they are going ahead with these amendments, and the joint committee did not appreciate the inputs that were provided. And I had the opportunity, and they gave me a very good opportunity to appear before them. It's like presenting evidence. That's how they consider it. So they gave me 20 minutes. I could speak. There are 2-3 things. I'll give you a very, what shall I say, crazy analogy. Supposing there is the Drugs and Cosmetics Act. Scientific research is saying that if paracetamol is sold and prescribed, people are going to have a cardiac arrest. When that is the medical research, when it is saying that it is not, but I'm just giving a crazy example. Is it correct for the Drugs and Cosmetics Act to allow sale of paracetamol? Answer is clear. However, in case of Forest Conservation Act, when scientific research is clearly telling us 2 things. One, fragmentation of forests or breaking up of large blocks of forest into smaller, supposing this is a large block of forest, so I give away this, I give this away, I give this away, and this is gone. And you've broken this large patch into 3-4 patches and created new edges. First there was only this edge. Now you've created this edge, you've created this edge, here is an edge, here is... 30 years of the best science in landscape ecology is telling us that fragmentation of forests or breaking up of large blocks of forest into smaller bits and pieces is the single biggest threat. Now, the statement of objects of the Forest Conservation Act say that we need to conserve forests for climate change, etc., etc. But there is no provision whatsoever in the Forest Conservation Act, in the amendments, which address this issue of fragmentation. Is this the right approach to lawmaking? Is the question. And I pointed this out. And I also showed them a study by a government agency, National Remote Sensing Center. And I showed them the data and gave them a copy of that report, which shows that there's tremendous amount of fragmentation in the country. That issue has not been addressed at all in the amendment. The act was enacted in 80 when our knowledge was not as up to date, and we still did not have all this. But today, in the intervening period, our knowledge and our understanding of forest ecosystems has gone up considerably. And in my view, law must ensure that scientific principles are, law is enacted based on proper scientific principles. Otherwise, we'll have that kind of an absurd situation, as I explained. So this is one part. The second part is, again, scientific research is very clearly telling us that planting of trees is no antidote to forest loss and forest fragmentation. The law, the amendments in the law that are now sailing through in the parliament doesn't address this. It uses, or it falls back on this archaic idea that forest loss can be compensated by planting trees elsewhere. And I did not mince any words before the parliamentary committee. But unfortunately, and I showed them photographs also. For instance, in Kudremukh, which we fought for a long time, the mining gouged out all the grassland areas. These are pristine natural grassland. They dumped the overburden in a Shola forested valley. And then to show that compensatory afforestation has to be done, they went and planted the grasslands with the eucalyptus and casuarina. So the remedy was worse than the malady. And we are still continuing with this new amendment, we will continue to be in this. It is not being addressed. And that's a huge opportunity lost. And I think it's not a good approach to lawmaking in my view. But as a citizen, I can only say that much. I can do only that much. No, the Joint Committee, Parliamentary Committee, heard all the experts. But for reasons best known to them, they have said that the bill is, in fact, the Director General of Forests was sitting next to me. And the chair asked for a response. He did not counter this issue of fragmentation at all. It is that wrong perception that development will get affected. But it is not so. See, because the principle is that only site-specific projects must be allowed. Otherwise, forest land should not be diverted for development or whatever it is. Now the issue is, let us take the case of highways. At least we have taken a clear view that we are not opposed to highways per se. These are typically called as linear intrusions. It could be a highway, railway, pipeline, etc., or a power line. So there are ways and means of dealing with this. Let us take the case of this very talked about Hubli-Ankola railway. I think you may be aware of it. Now, should railway connectivity exist from Hubli to Ankola? The answer is yes. Does it exist already? The answer is yes. The issue is as follows. Should you start puncturing the Western Ghats every 10 to 50 kilometers with these linear intrusions? There is a railway line connecting to the Konkan railway, which is from Hubli to Madgaon. Madgaon is in Goa, it's not in Pakistan. It's in our own, it's a neighboring state. All that is required is a Y junction so that the rail trains coming from Hubli either can go north to Madgaon along the existing track or take this junction and come down south to Ankola and head to Mangalore or wherever it is. For a small sum of about 300 crores, that's what the NTCA report estimates, I think so. It's a very nominal amount you can establish this. But the idea is to push through a greenfield alignment, through pristine forests. That will fall foul of, so wherever there is a development necessity and there's no other option, you will then have to think of not avoidance, but of mitigation. You can build an overpass, you can build an underpass, you can do a whole lot of things. For instance, with power lines, you can use HVDC power cables so that forests are not cut for the transmission lines. All this technology is available. In fact, from India to Sri Lanka, there's an undersea power cable. So all this is available. So, but we want to mask this under the facade of development and push it through. It is not good for ecology, it's not good for economy, because the exchequer is unnecessarily burdened with another 15,000 crores. And the project development is going to take place in 15 years or so. So, strengthening the Forest Conservation Act, they assume that these things will get curtailed, but it's not so, because you can always, for instance, let's take the case of mining, site specific. So there is an ore body and you can only mine where the ore exists. So that becomes a site-specific component if you disaggregate the larger mining project. The larger mining project will have a power line, will have a township, will have a processing plant, etc. Why should the processing plant and the township and the power line, all these demand forest land? If a certain ore of national importance is available and you need to extract it for the larger benefit of the country, okay, it could be a strategic mineral. But the ore body alone can be located inside, not the other. So this idea also I explained to the committee. And I said there must be safeguards built into the Forest Conservation Act. But it was not heard or taken cognizance of. Last point I want to make on this. Wildlife Protection Act is about 60 odd sections. Indian Forest Act is 80 odd sections. Environment Act is about 20 odd sections. Why should the Forest Conservation Act be 5 sections alone? With 100 plus guidelines. And we all know how guidelines can be tweaked every other day, whereas the law can't be tweaked every day. And therein lies the truth. No, 1 minute. You're mixing up two things. Parliamentary committees are different. National board is different. National board's duties are prescribed under the Wildlife Protection Act. Parliamentary committees are constituted to look at bills. And in my view, I have appeared before 2 parliamentary committees. They do a very thorough job. Like what we see in Parliament otherwise, they really go into the details and very systematically approach the issue, call in people and so forth. But it is their priority and prerogative to accept what experts say and not accept what. But that's a democratic process. And you have other fora where you can agitate your, demands. But it's a very, very good process. And it's very important for your readers also to know that, and they don't work in media glare. There is no television there, there is nothing, no reporters are allowed. In fact, the submission, I couldn't have spoken on this if they had not tabled the report, because till the report is tabled, the submissions made cannot be revealed. So it's a robust system. So that's important. So, but then, yes, there are competing demands, and the government of the day is empowered, and under the constitutional scheme of things, the central government has the legislative competence to enact a law on forest conservation because it falls in the concurrent list, where both state and center can. Whereas in the Forest Rights Act, the question before the Supreme Court is, did the central government have legislative competence to enact a law pertaining to land revenue and land survey, which is a state subject? Forests are different from forest land. That is why even under the Forest Conservation Act, the process starts with the state government moving the application before the central government. The central government only says yes or no. And it is the state government which grants the mining lease or whatever it is, because land comes under state. Even in case of sanctuaries, national parks, central government doesn't notify them. It is the state government which notifies it. So these are systems. So therefore, it's important to know these things, because otherwise what happens is that everybody will think, no, it's not undergone due process. It has, but it's not convinced a person like me, because I had felt that this was a good opportunity for the Parliament to recognize the vast progress in scientific research and what it is saying, and build in safeguards. And the law can be enlarged and these guidelines can be included. For instance, there is a strategy used by these linear agencies like highways, etc. It was flagged by the Supreme Court in a 3-judge bench judgment called Lafarge in 2011. And they issued guidelines, the Supreme Court issued guidelines, which is as good as a law, to avoid this thing called fait accompli. What highways would do is, they would break the entire project into 2 parts. So, part B would be the distance inside the national park. Part A would involve the road coming in and to this point from this side and this side. And they would approach the national board after the road alignment was finalized and it had come to the boundaries of the national park. By saying that, oh, I've already invested 800 crores, I've created the road, so now you have to give us. So Supreme Court red flagged this. And in the Lafarge judgment guidelines, they said this must not be permitted. There is no safeguard now included in the law that was just now amended or under amendment on this issue. It's a very serious matter. It affects both ecology and economy. So these are some of the issues. But then these can only be of course, a citizen has the right to challenge a law, but then it has to be on grounds of how the amendments are ultra vires the Constitution. And that's a big challenge. And you can't rush with a frivolous petition because there's a lot of chatter and a lot of people are talking about it. And it's everybody's right to go to the court. Nobody can stop. But then I only hope and pray that, and I did put this out also in the public domain when I received a mass mail. So this can't be based on some petition and some online petition or whatever. It can't work that way. It has to be a serious, well-researched petition looking into constitutional aspects and with a very good legal team. Even to get the matter admitted would take a lot. So let's see what happens. Yes, I understood your point. It's actually a good point. What happens is that, as I said earlier, land belongs to the state. There is a central legislation called as the Indian Forest Act, under which forests in the Western Ghats have been notified as reserved forests. And subsequently, under another central legislation called Wildlife Protection Act, some of these reserved forests are notified as sanctuaries or national parks. The central legislation applies uniformly across states. But it is the state's administrative control, and they will be in charge of these areas, and they are going to manage it and implement the central law. So the 4 or 5 different states through which the Western Ghat exists, where it's found, the respective state governments are in charge. Central government will pass guidelines, issue circulars, etc., or even change legislation, as they are doing now for the Forest Conservation Act. And they will apply uniformly across all the states where the Western Ghats are located. Difficult to say that, because since the law applies uniformly, they will have to abide by that, comply with the law. For instance, whether it's creation of, approval for development projects and all that. Ultimately, the same law applies and the same procedure applies and so forth. And But then there are individual variations, including the Western Ghats itself has different kinds of habitats. So, but, and also courts have intervened in many, Goa for instance, a lot of intervention. But Goa, there's been a lot of pressure on mining and other projects, and it's a small state. So therefore one can't really say which state has done better, or Kerala has its own set of issues because there's so much of population. It's a narrow, small state again. So there's pressure on land, considerable pressure on land. So you can't really exactly say which state has done well. But then Maharashtra and Karnataka have been the largest states with more forests, and they've probably had a little more elbow room than Kerala or Goa, for instance. Oh, there are many.
Many,
in
but
this.
some that stand
Yeah,
out.
one which really stands out is we were doing the line transects in, I think, 91 or 92, I can't remember. And I was with a very, very good tracker. He was so good. He could see a blade of grass bent, and he would say that something has crossed in this direction. He could pick, he was a superb tracker. So he was with me. His name itself was, he got the title Huli Raju. So we were going on the line, and there was a log lying. We crossed it, and just after that there was the end of the transect. So we finished, and I made the entries, closed the data sheet, put it in my haversack, and we had to walk back to the main road. This was about a kilometer away. So this was about 200 meters from the end. We were coming back after finishing, and I was looking at my step, trying to cross this. I felt something cross. And I just looked up and just froze like that. There was a tiger at a distance of about 100 feet. The tiger was crossing like this, and it stood like this. And we were looking at each other. I heard some noise. Raju was behind me, and there's some rustle. So I said, what are you doing? He said, he's trying to take out his matchbox. So I just held his hand. So this was probably about 30 seconds, 40, I can't remember. The tiger went on its way. We went back. But seeing a tiger on foot is a very, very different experience as compared to seeing it on sitting in a vehicle. And Mr. Chinnappa, who heads our organization, he is my wildlife guru. She knows him very well. He's the doyen. And he had this unique skill of walking in the forest at night without any light. And when he was in Nagarhole and he was in charge of a particular range, so we used to go there. And one evening, late evening, he said, today let's go at night. So he took us, and we were walking back. Another friend of mine was with me. Just three of us were there. So we were walking, and he was ahead of us. Beyond that, I couldn't see. It was dark. And he just stopped us. And then I could barely find out that he was trying to point in that direction. There's a group of elephants. He had sensed them. And I mean, that was something. So, walking in the forest is, and unfortunately today, nobody is walking in the forest. Those who should walk,
We don't have Huli Rajus anymore.
they're dwindling. It's a dwindling tribe. And trackers are force multipliers. because they are so good. See, I believe in one thing. You may call me old school, whatever it is. America, with the best technology, lost the war on terror in Afghanistan to Taliban, which had rudimentary equipment, but solid boots on the ground and solid skills. So your drones and your satellite imagery and all are well, you can use them. I have no problem with it. But real boots on the ground and quality leadership to your ground staff will make a difference. Technology and all is secondary. And the real recovery of tigers happened when officers were walking the forest, hard nuts, they were on the ground, they were boosting the morale of the staff. There's a legendary IFS officer called Sanjay Debroy in Assam. I have seen him sleep in anti-poaching camps. He was the chief wildlife warden, the top officer, sleeping with his staff in conditions which were pathetic. That was the kind of, those were the legends who recovered wildlife in the country. Chinnappa and all, the kind of suffering they have undergone is huge. They didn't have vehicles, they didn't have weapons, nothing, no staff. One fellow has some leg issue, one fellow has some eye issue, he has to deal. And they did it. No sleep, no this thing, night patrolling, facing armed intruders. Hats off to them. But today, unfortunately, see, you can't manage a national park with an iPhone or an iPad. And all this software and this and that is quoted often, and Bosky often hears it, Huli and M stripes and this and that. Okay, you can have all that. But I'm old school in this. You need solid boots on the ground, and I still remember the head of NSG, J.K. Dutt, who's no more, when the Mumbai attack happened. After that, he was being interviewed on some television channel, and the anchor was asking questions on equipment and what weapons and this, and he said, no, let us strengthen the beat constable on the ground. This was his reaction. It's not mine. With his experience, he said that. Even today, you talk to an old police officer who has done real good, hard work. I have a few friends. They'll tell you, the man on the ground has to be strengthened, because forest staff particularly, this is important. Leadership assumes importance more than equipment and technology and all that, because they come from that social strata who need the backing. They come from humble backgrounds. The moment you give them good leadership, they'll do wonders. And these are stories that are not, or reality that is not projected. We always think, oh, he should be given an AK-47, this, that. Not required. Not required. Like basic policing, I'm no expert, I just narrated what the then DG of NSG said. I can tell you, I've seen Chinnappa operate. Get your ground knowledge, field knowledge, tracking on the ground. We need Huli Rajos, etc. Your job is done. For that, you need quality leadership. Not going in jeeps. Walk the forest.